better world by modeling and engineering ecologically sound trail networks in the places and green spaces where they live. This is a challenge meant for an outdoor education classroom, although it also incorporates skills and concepts from grade 7 science and the engineering design process. The guiding questions for this challenge are: how do existing trails in public lands balance the needs of the human and non-human communities? As the surrounding human population increases, how will we maintain or improve the impact that human creative trails have on our ecosystems? This task is limited to a semi-urban green space covering only a few square kilometers. It's bounded on one side by a service road and on the other by a river. So this task takes students outside, but never far from population centers nor through challenging terrain. Because this task is limited to such a tame area, it actually situates very well at the beginning of the outdoor strand in the outdoor education curriculum. Here's a quote from the curriculum, and it says that the outdoor strand begins by establishing a foundation of knowledge, skills, and attitudes throughout the outdoor core. Before any field trip, no matter how short, students must have the basic concepts, skills, and attitudes to ensure that this trip will be a safe and enjoyable one. Before starting this challenge, students will also have studied local wildlife, and they'll be able to identify a variety of plants and animal species. This means that students will have had a start on the environmental strand of the curriculum. They will, to quote the curriculum, become aware of and appreciate local environments and begin to understand the basic ecological principles that apply generally to all environments. Building on these foundations, students are then introduced to environmental investigations. In this part of the course, students will apply problem-solving skills to specific environmental investigations. Students investigate current practices and their alternatives, identify advantages, disadvantages, and consequences of each, and decide on the best option. So as you'll see clearly, this engineering task fits in really well with the investigative side of the environmental strand. So we'll get into the grade 7 science connections a little later, but for now, I think we should get into the task, the actual task itself. So students will, from class studies of local ecosystems and from their preliminary field observations in this green space, they'll describe the various human and non-human users of a specific local ecosystem. You can see that I'm really interested in this shot in these little pieces of poop, these little scats. And that's because this is evidence of, in this case, a deer walking along and using this trail. And now these bigger pieces of poop, they kind of look like a pine cone. They're all clumped together rather than little individual pellets like the deer one. That's elk poop. And this National Geographic quality shot is of a woodpecker. I couldn't actually identify what kind of woodpecker. You're like, big deal, woodpecker, but there's also owls in here. I saw an owl for the second time in 12 years in Alberta in these woods. So with help from their teacher and the studies they've already done, students will, like I have, record all their observations of the different animals and the traces that the different animals in this ecosystem leave behind. Moving on to the other aspect of environmental investigation, students will begin to investigate the negative impacts of human presence in this green space. As you can see, unfortunately, there are many instances of damaging behavior and evidence of that behavior all around, from litter to fire pits to hacked trees, and as you'll see, even several encampments or kind of party areas. And so once students have made a note of and observed all the various negative human impacts in their own local ecosystems, they can begin the design and engineering process to make this world a better place. And that process, as Davis et al. In 2015 explain, begins with the step of asking questions. Perhaps unsurprisingly, beginning to ask questions is where this task also meets up with the grade 7 science curriculum. The focusing question for the very first unit in grade 7 science is, how do human activities affect ecosystems? To better understand how humans affect their ecosystems, students can do research at this point into the specific animals that they've observed or found traces of in the ecosystem, or the teacher can provide information about how humans and these animals typically interact. One thing that I wish I had been better prepared for in my primary and secondary education is the amount of research that students are expected to do in post-secondary education. So for this activity, I have modeled a student who would do their own research into the interactions between animals and humans. So in my research, I found an article that described how human presence and activity affects behavior of elk herds. These researchers state that in a human-dominated landscape, effects of human disturbance on elk behavior exceed those of habitat and natural predators. Humans trigger increased vigilance and decreased foraging in elk. Some species are much more likely to be disturbed by humans than by non-human predators. For these species, quantifying human disturbance may be the highest priority for conservation. So I've answered my first question, what effect do humans have on their ecosystem, with a pretty resounding negative answer in this case. So I can go back to the guiding question for this task, which is, how do existing trails in this land, in this space, balance the needs of human and non-human communities? And another question, how do we maintain or improve the impact that human-created trails have on this ecosystem? Well, to answer the first question, existing trails in this public space are a mix between wide, heavily traveled human trails made by humans and small side trails where there's lots and lots of evidence of elk and deer movement. But these small side trails are also where most of these encampments and most of the damage is being done by humans. So it seems that the issue is humans are encroaching beyond their own trails and their own use of this space onto the habitat corridors or the wildlife corridors used by deer and elk and other animals. So to maintain or improve the impact of humans and human trails on this ecosystem, what we, the students, need to do is find a way to discourage humans from using those small elk, deer side trails. So this means it's time to move on to the next part of the engineering design process, imagining. And to help us imagine and model how we're going to make this world a better place, we're going to nerd out on NetLogo.
Okay, I apologize for the jarring transition from nature shots to technosynth, but anyways, students will open up NetLogo, which you've seen before, and they will find out of the models library this model called paths. And so if I click setup, you can see that conveniently there's also a green space in this model, just like in the real world. And students will use this model to first represent the trails that they've seen out in the field, and also to begin imagining solutions to building better trails than those that exist right now. So I'll walk you through how this model works. These walkers, starting out, they move randomly from patch to patch. However, every time they step on a patch, you can imagine them increasing the popularity of that patch from 0 to 100. So say one walker steps on a patch and it goes from 0 to 100 right away. Other walkers, in their looking around in their field of vision, if they see a patch that is at 100% popularity, they'll go to that patch instead of any other patch. And if I click setup and go, you can see this happen. So the gray patches are those that are popular and are the ones that the walkers look out for. And this happens in real life. So this models perhaps real life in the green space, where people will look for paths that have been walked on and broken in instead of walking through bush and branches and stuff like that. So now the students can control the simulation, the behavior of the walkers and the behavior of the ecosystem using all these sliders on the left. First off, I will actually start at the bottom and turn on show popularity. Now you can see these ghost white lines show up, and this is just a representation of the fading popularity from, say, 100% with the gray patches down to 0 with the green patches. And then at the top, we've got popularity decay rate. So how quickly, after a walker has stepped onto a patch, does it go from 100% popularity back down to 0 popularity? And that's how you change that variable. So I'll turn it way up, and you'll see the gray patches turn green almost immediately. So I'll turn it back down to maybe 4%. And once again, the walkers begin making a decent impact on their ecosystem. To also control the popularity, or the impact on the walker's ecosystem, you can increase the popularity per step. So each step that a walker takes on a patch, if I turn this up, they'll have a bigger and bigger impact on that patch. You can see the gray boxes balloon when I increase the walker's impacts. And now they're walking all over the place because, say this is a fragile ecosystem, each step just totally decimates the greenery and the wildlife there. So if I turn it back down, this could represent an ecosystem that is really resilient and grows back really heartily after it's been beat up by all these walkers. So this is the process that students will go through. They'll play with this program and imagine how these different variables correspond to real world phenomena. So this popularity decay rate slider would perhaps indicate how quickly an ecosystem can replenish and regrow after it's been negatively impacted by human behavior. The popularity per step slider might indicate how resilient that ecosystem is in the first place. It might grow back really slowly, but if it's a very hardy ecosystem, it takes a lot of negative impact to show up in our observations. The next few variables are more to do with the walker behavior than the ecosystem behavior. So students could look at the minimum root popularity and say, okay, turn this back up. So we got some paths. So the minimum root popularity, how it changes the walker behavior is it makes them more or less picky, basically. And if our minimum root popularity for each walker to be attracted to a certain patch is really high, then they look only for the really, really popular paths. And you can see that the number of paths reduce and the walkers follow a fewer number of paths, but maybe in a more concentrated way. And if we make the walkers even less picky, then they'll go to, a path with 10% or here 17% popularity. So not walkie pickers here, or walkers here. Walker count, pretty self-explanatory. We've got 250 on the screen right now. And then walker vision distance is the variable that determines how far ahead a walker will look to find popular and unpopular patches. So if they look really far ahead, then they're more likely to find paths that already exist. And it also slows down the model, as you can see, because it makes the model a little more complex and the walkers have to execute more commands. But if we turn the walker vision distance down, first the model speeds up, and they're a little more random. It seems like they're making paths all over the place because they can't find the ones that are far away. Okay, the very last thing that I forgot to mention, and it's very important, is you can manipulate this model even further by adding in goals for the walkers to walk towards. So right now, the only thing they're looking for is popular paths. Otherwise, they're walking around randomly. If I click on the field, I make a little red house. Big deal. Their behavior doesn't change. But as soon as I introduce a second, walkers will do their best to walk towards that goal, from one goal to the other, but they'll also look for the best path, the most popular path. So if I introduce another goal here and maybe another here, you can see that they're not always, like a lot of the time they're walking in straight lines, but not always here, because they're looking for the most popular route, a compromise between the most popular route and the most direct route. And then you can also take these goals away just by clicking on them again. And you can see these paths remain for a little while, and walkers will still bend along an old path because it's the most popular route. So this is a really useful tool for modeling changes in this ecosystem and the trails that are there. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is actually make some changes to the code and other settings in this model. And students could do this if you want them to begin a challenge and a task of coding and mathematizing real-world phenomena, then you could have them explore the code and the different settings of this model. I'll do that now, and I'll show you what I come up with. Okay, so I made a few changes to the stock model. The first one you can see is obvious. I changed the walker shapes from arrows to humans, person shaped, and that's just an aesthetic change. The next one I made is I bounded the world. So whereas in the first model, if a walker went all the way off the left edge of the model, they would then appear on the right edge. And I just put walls in, so they'll bounce off the edges instead. I changed the maximum walker count here from 1,000 to about 150. With such a high maximum, it was hard to make small changes at the lower end of the scale, and anything above 150, it was hard to tell what was going on in the model anyways. Another small change I made was when you used to slide the minimum root popularity all the way down to the left, it would go to 0, and for some reason that would make the program crash, so I just fixed that so it can only go down to 1. And then I've also added in these buttons, and to show what they do, it's easiest if I click go. You can see the walkers bouncing off the edges, like I said, and now they're making a path. So maybe I will just increase this a bit. They're making a few paths. Now this button, it makes them draw path lines. So if I click it, you can see a general record of where all the different walkers are going. And this is a really useful tool if we're going to make changes to the model and we want to witness the effects of our changes. So say I want to imagine in the world that I am increasing the visibility of the walkers. So maybe I'm adding signs. This is the imagination part of the engineering process. Maybe students imagine, I want to add more signs to the trails so that walkers see where they're supposed to go, and they're not just left guessing where they're allowed to go or not. So I'm going to increase the walker visibility to 25. We've still got the record of the old paths. And now if I clear the path lines, we can see how the paths have changed, and there's maybe fewer paths. There's kind of like 3 main branches here. Another way I, the student, can imagine keeping walkers on the walking paths and out of the elk and the deer and all the other animal habitats are, rather than making signs and increasing walker vision distance, maybe I can make them more discerning. Maybe I can change walker behavior so that they stay on the bigger and better paths and aren't tempted to go on the smaller paths. So I'm going to start my simulation here, and why don't I actually make kind of 4 little homes here. And right now the minimum root popularity is quite low, so walkers really aren't that picky, and they're going between all the homes here, as you can see. So I'm going to start drawing the path lines to kind of get a baseline measurement about how these walkers are acting. So we can see there's 4 main paths, and if we imagine this center area, I'm going to stop drawing. If we imagine this as a green space in between these 4 main paths, we can see the walkers have trampled right through the middle to sometimes get the shortest path to all the other targets. Now what happens, I wonder, if I increase the minimum root popularity and in effect make these walkers more discerning and only walk on really the more popular paths. So I'll take it up to, let's say, 70 or something. Let them walk for a bit, clear the path lines, and start drawing again. See how it looks different. Okay, this is interesting. And now I'll stop drawing. It's been maybe the same amount of time. So we had some weird behavior here, but it looks like, to me, the walkers have left this green space more open and have stuck to these 4 main trails a little more, which is good. That is what I was hoping for. So this is sort of my modeling the different behaviors that we can influence in walkers and try and get a good outcome. So yeah, it looks like we've got 4 distinct paths, and walkers really aren't cutting many corners here. So that's great. And now, even though I'm, as a student, taking part in this challenge, I'm just in the imagining phase of the design cycle outlined by Davis et al. I am taking part in the whole engineering design process, even within this step. So I'm I'm asking how can I improve the paths, I'm imagining how I can do it, I'm creating different different environments using the different variables available to me in the model. I'm testing how those interventions work, and I'm improving them, as you can see in this video. So I've spared you the experimentation, and all that is to say is that even in this one step in the design process, in the imagining step, another iterative design process is nested within that step, and the same goes for the next step and the other step and the next step. So the whole process from start to finish is iterative. Okay, so my intervention I've decided is going to be to make the walkers more discerning about which trails they choose to walk on. So they're going to choose the most popular trails, the widest and the most well-established trails, so as to stay out of the green spaces. What I think I want to do is I want to educate the walkers about the benefits of staying on the marked trails and the negative impacts that they can have if they wander off the trails. Maybe people just don't get it enough, you know? So how I'm going to educate people is I'm going to design a brochure like this. It's going to say green space etiquette. And it's going to have some elk facts, and it's going to have maybe a map. So on this there will be a map of all the different trails that you're allowed to go on. If I were trying to improve the walker visibility, like so that people can see the existing trails and stick to them and know which trails they're supposed to go on, I could design signposts and say trail this way. I could plan on installing signposts. That'd be another way to improve user behavior like we modeled. The issue is there's already some signposts in this green space, and they don't seem to be doing a very good job. So I'm going to go with this plan of educating the public and make them more discerning. So part of my planning process, I've got to plan these documents, and I've got to figure out how am I going to distribute them in the first place. Maybe on these trail signs, I can have a little container here, and it's full of brochures. And people can take one every time they pass. There's also in the trail network there's also a couple signs saying basically keep your dog on the leash. Here's a dog, and it says no off-leash dogs. And then on the sign also is a little canister full of poop bags for your dog. And maybe on these signs as well, I could have some brochures for people to take. Maybe also at the beginning of a trail. So here's a tree, and here's the trail. Maybe on busy days on the trails, I can have kind of a steward standing there, happy, welcoming people, and maybe they've got brochures and they're handing them out. So in this planning process, I'm thinking, how can I effectively intervene in the world in the way that I have planned? Well, we're back to the live action filming, which means we're back to the lovely acoustic guitar. And now in this step, we are creating our materials. We're creating the designs that we've been planning this whole time. So this is a brochure like the one that I drew up. It's definitely not an A-grade brochure, but this is a chance for students to do some interdisciplinary work. So if they're making a sign, a trail sign, in shop class they can make those signs. If they're making a brochure like this, maybe in their computer lab they can learn how to design an actual brochure that would be up to a publishing standard. And of course, to communicate effectively in that brochure, they'd have to recruit some English language arts literacies. to effectively communicate and convince the public why they should stay on the marked trail. So our brochures are out, and we're back on the trails. Don't worry, this is not human footprint carnage. This is actually elk tracks where they like to wallow in the shallows here. And now the tricky part: how do we test the efficacy and the impact of these interventions that we've designed and implemented? And testing in this sort of environment with these many variables and users of the system could be really challenging for a middle school or a high school student. And while I was out on the trails, I ran into a few of these wildlife cameras and trail counters from Alberta parks that are already measuring some of the uses of these trails. So to me, it seems like this is a really good opportunity for a school to partner up with a municipality or a government agency like Alberta Parks to actually measure the impact that the students' work is having in the real world. And there's a really good possibility here for collaboration between the school and the community to measure the effectiveness of the design that the students have come up with. Now, for the last stage in the engineering design process, I can hear everybody saying to their screens, finally. Students will, after testing their interventions in the field, will ask, did my model accurately predict the changes that I observed in the field? How else can I plan and construct ecologically sound trail systems? Perhaps a combination of interventions works the best. So now is a really good chance for students to start again, to go back into NetLogo and innovate and improve on their last design. Something that I think might be unique to this challenge in particular is the opportunity for a year-long or a multi-year project to improve these trail systems. This really suits the outdoor education curriculum, which is designed to be offered as a sequential program of up to 3 years, grades 7, 8, and 9. And perhaps this multi-year project presents a more authentic STEM challenge to students because STEM and scientific studies often take years rather than a few months to complete. Oh, I did it again. I made another 30-minute video. Oh well, we're here now. So now that we're at the other end of the task, the challenge, I think it might be even easier to see the connections between this task and the grade 7 science skills and concepts as outlined in the program of studies. In that program, it says that students investigate human impacts and engage in studies that involve environmental monitoring and research. By reflecting on their findings, students become aware of the intended and unintended consequences of human activity, and they recognize the need for responsible decision-making and action. So to me, it's quite clear there's direct connections from this task to the grade science 7 curriculum for the first unit of the year. Also in the grade 7 program of studies, our specific science skills on pages 12 and 13, there are outlined specific skills that I think you'll agree line up really, really well with Davis's engineering process loop. Those skills are initiating and planning, performing and recording, analyzing and interpreting, and communication and teamwork. And while these skills in the science curriculum, there might be some parts of the engineering design process missing, like the iterative aspect or the innovative aspect. But I think one nuance that the curriculum did capture really well is the teamwork aspect of engineering that Davis also picks up on. And I think that's a unique part of the engineering design process that you don't see in a lot of the other STEM fields. Thanks for your patience if you made it all the way through my STEM engineering task. I think through this kind of task, students can actually figure out on their own ways to improve the world, build a better world in places where they live, in their own local environments. So I'll leave you with this little piece of human impact on the environment. You can decide for yourself if it's negative or positive. Thanks very much.